The Cedar Ridge Horse Fair bustled with life as ranchers and families from across the valley gathered to trade, compete, and celebrate the animals at the heart of their lives. Dust swirled in the air, mingling with the aroma of roasted corn and the sweet tang of candied apples. Children raced between the stalls, while riders showcased their finest horses to the admiring crowd. But Ellie Hayes barely noticed the commotion. Her world narrowed to the figure pacing within the wooden corral, a magnificent black stallion named Midnight. His muscles rippled under his ebony coat, his nostrils flaring with every defiant snort. The air around him crackled with unspent energy, as though the stallion were a storm confined to mortal form. "Stay back, Ellie," her father Samuel said firmly. His weathered face, bronzed by years under the sun, reflected both pride and unease as he observed his daughter's unwavering focus. At just 16, Ellie had earned a reputation in Red Rock Valley for her extraordinary connection with horses. What others considered wild or broken, she saw as misunderstood souls, longing for trust. "Dad, he's not dangerous," Ellie murmured, her gaze never leaving the stallion. "He's just waiting for someone to listen." Samuel sighed, his words heavy with warning. "That horse is beyond saving, Ellie. Even seasoned ranchers gave up on him." Lucas Price's booming voice cut through the din. "Midnight is up for sale," the grizzled rancher declared. "He's fierce, he's fast, and he'll break every bone you've got if you try to ride him. But if you've got the guts, step right up." The crowd jeered and laughed. No one moved, their skepticism written on every face. But then Ellie stepped forward, her boots crunching on the dirt. A murmur rippled through the onlookers as Samuel grabbed her arm. "Ellie, don't." "I have to, Dad," she said softly, her eyes alight with quiet determination. Lucas looked her over and chuckled. "You ride him?" He shook his head. "Girl, this horse doesn't play nice." Ellie ignored the taunts. Her steps were deliberate, calm. Midnight stopped his restless pacing, his ears flicking toward her. The crowd fell silent, watching as Ellie extended a hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay, boy. I'm here." The stallion snorted, tossing his head. But instead of rearing, he hesitated. Ellie took a step closer, her movements slow and deliberate. The onlookers held their breath as the wild horse allowed her fingertips to graze his muzzle. The storm inside Midnight began to still. The world seemed to shrink, leaving only Ellie and Midnight in the corral. His dark eyes, still wary, held hers as if searching for a reason to trust. She moved her hand gently along his neck, her touch feather-light, as if afraid too much pressure would break the fragile thread of connection between them. "Good boy," she whispered. "You don't have to fight anymore." For a moment, Midnight froze, his muscles taut. Then, with a huff, he released a breath, his shoulders dropping slightly. The change was subtle, but Ellie felt it. The stallion's defiance wasn't gone. It was waiting, watching her with cautious curiosity. Behind her, Samuel stood at the edge of the corral, his jaw tight. He had seen Ellie work miracles before, transforming the family's skittish mare, Luna, into the gentlest horse on their ranch. But this was something else. Midnight wasn't just a horse. He was a force of nature, untamed and unyielding. Lucas crossed his arms, his smirk fading as he watched the scene unfold. "What's she doing?" someone whispered from the crowd. "She's not trying to tame him," another answered. "She's talking to him." Ellie reached for the reins Lucas had dropped on the ground. Midnight didn't flinch. Slowly, she looped them over his neck and murmured soft words, her tone even and steady. "Are you really gonna ride him?" Lucas barked, his voice laced with disbelief. "That's suicide, girl." Ellie turned to him with a calm smile. "Not suicide, trust." With no saddle and only the reins, Ellie climbed onto Midnight's back in one fluid motion. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Midnight tensed, his muscles coiling like a spring ready to snap. For a moment, everything held still. Then Midnight reared. The crowd erupted into shouts as the stallion thrashed, trying to throw her off. Ellie moved with him, her body flowing like water, her hands gripping his mane. "It's okay?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here." Bit by bit, Midnight's frantic movements slowed. His head lowered, his breathing steadied, and he began to walk, obedient, calm, and utterly transformed. The crowd fell silent, their disbelief giving way to awe. For Ellie, it wasn't a victory. It was a beginning. The sun dipped low over the Cedar Ridge Horse Fair, casting long shadows as the crowd gathered their thoughts after the miraculous scene in the corral. Midnight, the untamable beast, now stood quietly beneath Ellie, his stormy defiance replaced with a calm that left even the most seasoned ranchers speechless. Samuel approached cautiously, his heart a mixture of pride and unease. "Ellie, come down now. You've proven your point." Ellie gently slid off Midnight's back, her boots landing softly in the dirt. She turned to face her father, her hand resting lightly on the stallion's neck. Midnight didn't move, his wild energy subdued but not extinguished. "I wasn't trying to prove anything, Dad," Ellie said. Her voice was soft but firm. He just needed someone to listen. Lucas Price, who had been leaning on the corral fence with his arms crossed, straightened and strode toward her, shaking his head. "That was something else, girl. But don't think you've tamed him. One calm moment doesn't mean he won't bolt the second he's spooked." Ellie met his skeptical gaze. "Maybe. Or maybe he just needed a chance to trust someone." Lucas grunted, clearly unimpressed. "He's yours then. If you think you can handle him, take him. Just remember, when he turns on you, it's on your head." The murmurs among the crowd grew louder. Some scoffed, shaking their heads at what they saw as foolishness. Others whispered words of admiration, their eyes wide with astonishment. Ellie nodded, her determination unwavering. "I'll take him." Samuel's hand gripped her shoulder. "Ellie, are you sure about this? Midnight isn't just a horse. He's a risk." She turned to him, her eyes shining with a conviction that silenced his doubts. "He's more than a risk, Dad. He's a chance to prove that even the wildest hearts can be understood." By the time the fair began to wind down, news of Ellie's feat had spread like wildfire. People approached her with questions, their skepticism mingled with curiosity. One young man with a camera introduced himself as Mark Decker, a local blogger. "What you did out there, it was incredible," he said, snapping photos of Ellie and Midnight. "Mind if I share this story online?" Ellie hesitated, feeling the weight of the attention settling on her shoulders. "I guess that's okay," she replied cautiously. That night, as Ellie walked Midnight back to their family ranch, she felt the first ripples of change. What had started as a quiet act of connection was already becoming something much larger. The days following the Cedar Ridge Horse Fair were a whirlwind Ellie hadn't expected. By the time she and Midnight settled at the family ranch, the story of her feat had spread far beyond Red Rock Valley. Mark Decker's post had gone viral, the photos and video of Ellie calming Midnight captivating people across the internet. The girl who tamed the untamable stallion, they called her. But not all the attention was kind. At first, the comments were full of praise. "This girl has a gift," read one. Another said, "We need more trainers like her." But as the story grew, so did the criticism. A prominent equestrian magazine published an article questioning Ellie's methods. "No horse is truly tamed in a single afternoon," the piece read. "Such rapid results suggest either prior training or dangerous shortcuts." Ellie tried to ignore it, but the doubts crept into her mind. Did she do something wrong? Was she unprepared for what Midnight needed? The pressure to defend herself, to prove her intentions were pure, grew with each passing day. Samuel noticed the change in her. His once bold daughter now lingered in the barn, brushing Midnight in silence. The stallion seemed to sense her unease, his ears flicking toward her every movement, his dark eyes watching as if he, too, were waiting for her next step. "You can't let them get to you, Ellie," Samuel said one evening, leaning against the barn door. "You did what you knew was right. That's all that matters. Ellie stopped brushing Midnight's coat and looked at her father. But what if they're right? What if I don't know enough? What if I just got lucky? Samuel crossed the barn, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Luck doesn't calm a horse like Midnight. Trust does, and you've got that in spades. Before Ellie could respond, an envelope arrived in the mail. The name on the return address made her pause. Henry Miles, a renowned trainer whose reputation for humane methods had made him a legend in the equestrian world. She tore the letter open, her hands trembling. "I've been following your story," the letter began. "You have a rare gift, but even the most talented need guidance. I'd like to invite you to my ranch in Wyoming. Together, we can refine your skills and prepare you for the challenges ahead." Ellie read the letter twice, her heart pounding. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a lifeline. She glanced at Midnight, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Looks like we're going on a trip, boy," she whispered. As the wind rustled through the barn, Ellie felt the first flicker of hope. The storm wasn't over, but now she had a way forward. Ellie and her father arrived at Henry Miles's sprawling ranch in Wyoming under a sky painted with the soft hues of dawn. The land stretched for miles, a patchwork of golden fields and rugged hills where horses roamed freely. The air was crisp and filled with a faint scent of pine, a sharp contrast to the warm familiarity of Red Rock Valley. Henry himself greeted them at the gate, his presence commanding yet calm. He was an older man with a silver-streaked beard and a weathered face that told the story of a lifetime spent among horses. His handshake was firm, his eyes assessing but kind. "You must be Ellie," he said, his voice steady, "and this is the famous Midnight." Ellie glanced at Midnight, who stood quietly beside her, his wild energy muted but not gone. "I don't know about famous," she replied, her voice soft but resolute. "We're just trying to learn. That's a good place to start," Henry said, leading them toward the ranch. "Horses don't care about fame, and neither do I. What matters is how you connect with them." Over the next few days, Ellie immersed herself in Henry's methods. His approach was rooted in patience and understanding, an almost meditative practice that resonated deeply with her. "Horses are like mirrors," he explained one afternoon as they watched a young colt trot nervously in a nearby paddock. "They reflect what you bring to them. If you're calm, they'll sense it. If you're uncertain, they'll feel that too." Ellie nodded, her gaze fixed on the colt. "So it's not about control, it's about trust." "Exactly," Henry replied with a small smile. "And trust isn't built in a moment. It's earned, over and over again." The work was challenging. Henry pushed Ellie to refine her techniques, emphasizing small, deliberate actions over grand gestures. She spent hours with Midnight, practicing the subtle art of silent communication. She learned to anticipate his movements, to sense his moods through the tension in his muscles or the flick of an ear. One afternoon, Henry handed Ellie a challenge. He led her to a corral where a chestnut mare named Ember waited. The horse had a history of abuse and refused to let anyone near her. "Show me what you've learned," Henry said simply. Ellie took a deep breath, stepping into the corral with the same quiet confidence she had used with Midnight. The mare's wide eyes followed her every move, her body taut with fear. Ellie didn't rush. She stood still, allowing Ember to feel her presence without pressure. Minutes passed, then an hour, but Ellie didn't falter. Slowly, Ember's rigid stance softened. The mare took a cautious step forward, then another, until her muzzle brushed Ellie's outstretched hand. From the fence, Henry watched with a nod of approval. "You've got something special, Ellie," he said as she exited the corral. "But the world won't always understand it. Are you ready for that?" Ellie met his gaze, her voice steady. "If it's for the horses, I'm ready." She didn't know it yet, but her journey was about to take her beyond anything she'd imagined. Ellie's days at Henry Miles's ranch passed quickly, each one filled with new lessons and quiet victories. Her bond with Midnight deepened, and her confidence grew as she applied Henry's teachings to other horses. Yet the shadows of doubt from the outside world loomed ever larger. One evening, as Ellie and Henry reviewed the day's progress, a call came through from the organizers of the National Equestrian Showcase, a prestigious event drawing trainers, riders, and animal behaviorists from across the country. They wanted Ellie to perform a live demonstration with Midnight, in front of an audience that would include skeptics and advocates alike. "It's an opportunity," Henry said after Ellie explained the call. "But it's also a test. They're not just looking to watch, they're looking to judge." Ellie's stomach churned at the thought. The world had already put her under a microscope since the Cedar Ridge Horse Fair. Would she be able to prove herself on a stage this large? Midnight, as if sensing her hesitation, nuzzled her arm. Her fingers ran along his silky mane as she whispered, "What do you think, boy? Should we show them what we can do?" The next morning, she called the organizers and accepted the invitation. The day of the National Equestrian Showcase arrived with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The venue was a sprawling arena, its stands filled with hundreds of spectators. Cameras lined the edges, their lenses trained on the center where Ellie and Midnight would soon perform. Among the audience were animal welfare advocates, seasoned trainers, and journalists, eager to report on the girl who had tamed the untamable. Midnight shifted restlessly as they waited behind the gates. The noise and energy of the crowd unsettled him, but Ellie remained calm. "It's just us," she murmured, stroking his neck. "You and me." When the announcer called their names, the crowd erupted into applause. Ellie walked Midnight into the arena, her heart pounding. The murmurs of the audience reached her ears. "She's just a kid. That's the stallion? He doesn't look so wild now." Ignoring the voices, Ellie focused on Midnight. She let him circle her, allowing the stallion to feel the space and adjust to the sea of eyes watching their every move. Slowly, she raised her hand, signaling him to stop. Midnight obeyed, his powerful frame stilling as he turned his gaze to her. Ellie moved with deliberate grace, guiding him with subtle gestures and whispered cues. Every step they took together demonstrated a bond forged not by force, but by trust. The audience leaned forward, mesmerized. Then came the moment everyone feared. A sudden roar of applause from a distant section startled Midnight. He reared, his hooves striking the air as gasps rippled through the stands. But Ellie didn't panic. She moved with him, her voice steady and soothing. "It's okay, boy. I'm here. Just breathe." Bit by bit, Midnight calmed, his breathing matching hers. She extended her hand again, and he lowered his head, allowing her to stroke his muzzle. The crowd erupted into cheers, but for Ellie, it wasn't about them. It was about the trust she'd built with Midnight, tested and proven once again. As she exited the arena, she was met with a mix of reactions. Some trainers approached her with admiration, others with skeptical questions. But one figure stood apart, a woman with a kind smile and sharp eyes. "Ellie Hayes," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Emily Carter, an animal behaviorist. I think what you're doing is extraordinary. I'd like to work with you to study your methods. Together, we can prove to the world that there's a better way to connect with animals." Ellie shook her hand, the weight of the day lifting slightly. Midnight nudged her shoulder, as if to remind her of the journey they'd traveled together. For Ellie, this wasn't just the end of a performance, it was the beginning of something far greater. The sun hung low over the rolling hills of Wyoming as Ellie returned to Henry Miles's ranch, her mind brimming with the events of the National Equestrian Showcase. Midnight trotted beside her, his powerful frame a symbol of everything they had overcome together. The cheers of the crowd, the intense questions from skeptics, and Dr. Emily Carter's proposal all swirled in her thoughts. Henry met her at the gate, his knowing smile a quiet reassurance. "Well, how does it feel to stand on the edge of something big?" he asked. Ellie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "It feels overwhelming," she admitted, "but exciting. Dr. Carter wants to study my methods. She thinks we can prove there's a better way." Henry's expression softened, pride shining in his eyes. "You've got what it takes, Ellie. But remember, this isn't just about proving yourself to the world. It's about staying true to what brought you here in the first place, the horses." Weeks later, Ellie stood in the heart of Henry's ranch as a team of researchers led by Dr. Carter set up their equipment. They aimed to measure the physical and emotional effects of Ellie's training methods compared to traditional approaches. For Ellie, it wasn't about validation. It was about ensuring that every horse she worked with felt safe, respected, and understood. The study began with Midnight. Researchers monitored his heart rate and cortisol levels during sessions with Ellie. The data revealed what Ellie had always known. Trust-based training reduced stress and improved responsiveness. The team expanded the study to include other horses, each one bearing unique scars from their pasts. The results were groundbreaking. Horses trained under Ellie's approach exhibited lower stress levels, quicker recovery from fear, and a deeper bond with their handlers. Dr. Carter published the findings, sparking a wave of interest and controversy in the equestrian world. Months later, Ellie stood before a crowd at the grand opening of the Haven Institute, a training and rehabilitation center she had founded with Henry's guidance and Dr. Carter's support. The institute was a sanctuary for animals of all kinds, horses, elephants, and even wildlife, where Ellie's humane methods would be taught to trainers and handlers from around the world. As she stepped to the podium, her gaze swept over the crowd. Familiar faces, her father, Henry, and even skeptics from her early days watched with anticipation. Midnight stood behind her, his presence a steady reminder of how far they had come. "I started this journey because I believed that even the wildest hearts could learn to trust," Ellie began, her voice strong and clear. "What I've learned along the way is that trust is a two-way street. It's not about taming, it's about listening, understanding, and building a bond that goes beyond words." The crowd erupted in applause, but Ellie's focus remained on the animals grazing in the distance, free and unburdened. This was her dream, not fame or recognition, but a world where animals were treated as partners, not possessions. As the sun set over the institute, Ellie walked to the pasture where Midnight waited. She stroked his neck, the quiet strength in his eyes mirroring her own. "We did it, boy," she whispered, "but this is just the beginning." And as the wind rustled the grass around them, Ellie knew that the journey she and Midnight had started together would inspire countless others to see animals not as challenges to conquer, but as souls to connect with. A lesson that could change the world. Ellie's story is not just about horses or training methods. It's a testament to the power of patience, respect, and compassion. It reminds us that every creature, no matter how wild, has the capacity to trust, if only someone is willing to listen. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video.